I do want to shift the conversation to South Africa because we have seen that you, of course, have had a very big impact at home as well. And something that I heard you speak about, albeit on a different interview, really just caught my eye, which is firstly that you explained that you've been blacklisted by the SABC. Now, I'm assuming that not just anybody can get blacklisted by the SABC. In fact, I'd never heard of such a concept. And I do remember that you did seem to have a bit of a back and forth of when you were with the SABC, when you weren't. But could you explain to us, well, how this whole situation came along?
So it was at the very beginning of my career. I started at the SABC, and in those days, I hope nobody's offended, but the SABC, we used to joke as falling apart. And we used to say, where do you go to from the SABC? And if you had told me I would go from the SABC to Russian television, I would have thought you were crazy. But, that's life for you. I had left the SABC. I had left and I was working as a freelancer. I had turned 30, and I know there are women out there who feel the same because I've had this conversation with my girlfriends. Those big zeros are a bit scary for us. And I was 30 and I was still working in South Africa, and I had this dream of breaking into international journalism. So I had moved across to Israel, but I didn't have a job. No, I hadn't moved across to Israel. Sorry. I was still in South Africa. I turned 30 and I was wanting to move to Israel. And the story came through that Yasser Arafat was dying. And I went to the head of news at that time, and a fantastic man, Jimmy Matthews, who was a mentor for me. And I said to him, I had already resigned. If I am in Ramallah or in the Palestinian territories and he resigns, will you take stories from me? And he said, if you want to do that, with pleasure. And that's always been one of my pieces of advice to young journalists, because one of the frustrations I had was, how do you get to be on the big stories? And I'd done a CNN course, and one of the CNN anchors had not, a lot of us journalists were young on that course, and we were all expressing that, and he didn't he didn't feel sorry for us. He said, if you want to be on the big stories, you put yourself on the big stories. And that's what I did. Is I took my life savings at that time. I bought a small camera. Remember, this is 25 years ago, whatever. And we didn't have social media. So it was still new technology, having a small camera. And I bought a laptop, an Apple laptop, which was new in those days in South Africa. And I bought the Final Cut Pro, and I taught myself how to edit. And I went off to Ramallah. And if you remember, Yasser Arafat there were conflicting reports coming through. He was dying, he wasn't dying, he was whatever. He was in France, but Ramallah was, of course, his hometown where he was going to be buried. And I was there for about a week doing stories, and I was filing stories back to the SABC, and they were accepting them and putting them on television. And then the day before Yasser Arafat died, and obviously we didn't know it was the day before, I phoned the SABC newsroom, and I've got a story that I want to send through. I was just making human stories on what was going on in the Palestinian territories. And I get told, Paula, we're sorry, but we've been told not to accept any more stories from you. I just couldn't understand this. I mean, here I am in Ramallah. Now that was scary for me at that stage, because I had no backup. I was staying in a youth hostel. I was completely green. I'd never been to a war zone before. I was 30 years old and I had no contacts. So I phoned Jimmy Matthews and I said, Jimmy, I've been told you are not taking my stories anymore. And that was the whole point of the agreement of why I came across. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't explain it to you. Just when you get back to South Africa, I'll explain it. And in those days we had internet cafes. Do you remember internet cafes? And I went to an internet cafe and I got online and I emailed everybody, because now I was in the right place, but I had no one to report to. And I emailed 702. And the next morning, the news comes through, Yasser Arafat has died. Kathy Katapodis was head of the newsroom at 702 in those days, and it only later became Eyewitness News. She phones me and she says, I've never employed anybody so quickly in my life. She says, I saw you on SABC 2 days ago, and SABC was competition because you had SABC radio and 702 radio. I said, no, I'm not working with SABC anymore. She said, fine, I'm putting you through to the newsroom now, like literally the same phone call. And I started filing reports for 702. And then Yasser Arafat is dead, and it's a massive story. A few hours later, or maybe not even hours, I get a phone call from SABC. Please, can you file a report for us? And I remember standing in the middle of it wasn't a protest march. It was thousands of people were coming out in Ramallah Square to start the funeral procession, or to express they were waiting for Arafat's body to be brought back. And I don't know what I'm doing now, because am I working for my dream was to stay with the SABC, but now they want me to work for them, but I'm just been offered a job and I've started filing for 702. And I remember making a decision, anything could change. I actually phoned my dad and he said, go with 702 because the SABC might be a short-term thing. And I remember all these people shouting around me and I'm going, Dad, what must I do? What must I do? So much for being like a grown-up, independent correspondent at the age of 30. To cut a long story short, I stay with 702. I stayed with them. That was a fantastic gig. I worked for them for the next 20 years or whatever. And when I came back to South Africa, not long afterwards, I met with Jimmy Matthews, and he told me that while I was gone, there had been a blacklist that had been put together by Snooki Zikalala, who was the bigger head. He was, I think, Jimmy was head of TV news, and Snooki was head of news, something like that. And it had lifted my profile because I was on the same blacklist as Thabo Mbeki's brother, because they didn't like his politics. And the reason Snooki had put me on the list, in his words, was because I was a Jewish reporter reporting from the Middle East, and I could not be relied on to be objective. And then he carries on and he says he comes from a position that they support the Palestinians, and that is a principled position. So, I mean, there was a glaring contradiction in the argument, but of course, he didn't see it. And I was contacted by some of the freedom of expression organizations in South Africa, the media lobby groups, and they all supported, because they were all outraged at this blacklist that had become public. John Perlman had made it public he had a radio show in the morning, and he had heard about that blacklist, and the names had been published and everything. So that was how the blacklist came about. I mean, Jimmy Matthews apologized for it. Obviously, Snooki was higher than him. But because of that blacklist, on the one hand, I appreciated the support from the Jewish community and the support from, let's say, people who supported Israel. But on the other hand, it also made things dangerous for me, because I had a lot of American far-right groups coming online. Remember, the internet was still new, and supporting me. And from there, I had joined, very soon afterwards, I joined RT and I started traveling the Arab world. And it was almost impossible to get some of these supports of, we're so proud of how Paula is not that Paula speaks positively about Israel, or whatever the reports were. That wasn't actually helping me from a safety point of view, when a few months later, I'm now traveling the Arab world for Russia Today.
It's just unbelievable to hear that kind of a story. I mean, I'm lost for words. But just a side question, Snooki, was he not a high up in the ANC at some point?
So he was with Umkhonto we Sizwe, and he was somehow connected to the torture camps. And we used to joke, because he had been the big boss of the newsroom when I was still working in Johannesburg in the newsroom. And we used to joke at that time, he's come to torture us. I loved my days at SABC. I can't lie. I really loved them. But towards the end, I became so frustrated. I mean, Snooki took me off 2 stories. I was reporting, there was I can't remember exactly. I think it was Racism in Journalism conference. And I had done the whole run up to the conference. I had done all the pre-interviews. And on the day the conference started, he replaced me with a black journalist. And I remember feeling, the whole point of the conference was undermined because of what he had done. And there was another incident where South Africa used to send search and rescue teams to earthquakes for assistance. And I was on the afternoon shift. They'd held a press conference. The search and rescue team were leaving the next morning. And I'd gone to the press conference organized by Netcare. And I was saying, oh my God, you guys are so lucky. I think they went to India. And you guys are so lucky, Art, what a dream. And one of the doctors said to me, well, come with us. And I said, are you being serious? And luckily Snooky wasn't available that afternoon to get permission from. And my editor had said, of course you can go. So I did all the inoculations. I was right there in the medical center with the emergency guys themselves. I remember coming home at like 4:00 in the morning and packing Super Cs. I mean, that's how ignorant I was. I was like, if they don't have food, well, Super Cs will keep me going. And getting to the airport by 6 in the morning. And I'm at the airport and I get a phone call from the newsroom that they're sending one of the black journalists over. I will not be going to India. Snooky doesn't want me there. And I remember just feeling so disempowered and a sense that life was so unfair. Fortunately, in that situation, the doctors said, well, there's no way we can take somebody else because we've inoculated Paula, we've approved the paperwork, it's just too late. But I know that Snooky wasn't happy about that story. I was at the SABC I joined in 96. So on the one hand, it was an exciting time because we were building the new South Africa. But on the other hand, it was so frustrating because all the white journalists that had been part of the SABC, which I understand had been seen as a mouthpiece of the apartheid government. I do understand the history. All of them were being pushed out. But for young journalists like myself, there were a few of us, it was so hard to find a footing there because we weren't part of the old association, but they didn't really want us in the SABC. And my dream was to be a journalist. And in those days, there wasn't an ENCA and there wasn't international media. So the SABC, if you wanted to be a television journalist, was the only place to go. And I remember repeated conversations with my father saying, how do I get in? How do I get in? They don't want me there. And eventually the way I got in actually was there was a program called Good Morning South Africa. And the producers were so unmotivated. And I worked for them for about 2 years for free, making programs. And eventually they came up to me and they said, you work so hard and we don't pay you. Imagine how hard you'll work if we do pay you. And I got a job in the SABC building. And then once you're in the building, you go knocking on doors. And then I was able to move across to the newsroom. But I loved my SABC days. I just didn't enjoy the way it ended because it became so political and so much more focused on politics and not on, I was crazy about journalism. I would have done anything for the profession and I worked long hours. And I felt in the end that none of that was recognized.
Right. It's just so appalling to hear the sort of treatment that they had of you, and as you mentioned, certain other journalists as well. And yeah, it really is just a form of workplace bullying on the lowest level, and then on the highest level, a political agenda. And I just think the one thing that really stands out to me, Paula, is that he accused you, Snooky accused you of being unable to be impartial in your reporting, yet he admits that he is a supporter of the PLO. So I don't quite understand
No, neither do
how
I.
he
If you
can
said
be
it
the
out,
one to right. It's just unbelievable. But yeah, as you said, I mean, you really managed to remain determined and finally get your foot in the door, and that's brilliant. But I do know that, of course, in more recent times, you've also had your run-ins on the South African scene, and I noticed how there was a little bit of a feud, if I can call it that, between you and the spokesman of DIRCO. So for any international listeners, that's the Foreign Ministry of South Africa. So their spokesman, Crispin Perry, and yourself. And I noticed how, for example, you had a certain article that was put out, and then he wrote an open letter condemning you, and then you had your reply in the Mail and Guardian. So could you explain what the origin of this feud was, and yes, really what eventually came of this?
One of the big stories here in South Africa, I mean, I don't know if it's such a big story now, but it's certainly a story for a while, was South Africa's close alignment with the Iranian government. And tied to that was the question about South Africa taking Israel to the courts in the Netherlands, taking to the ICC. And the question arose, so they all kind of interlinked. There were questions being asked. Did South Africa know? Why was South Africa so vocal and so forthcoming in wanting to take Israel to the ICC? And there was speculation, was it Iranian money? That firstly, there's speculation that South Africa receives Iranian money. And then there was speculation, was that money received before October the 7th? And was all of it planned before October the 7th? Because South Africa was very ready and very vocal to take Israel to the court. And then the question rose whether actually logically you could deduce from that, did South Africa even know about October the 7th before it happened? There's a lot of questions. They sound a bit confusing, but they're all kind of interrelated. And I had a source in the UK who is, he's a lawyer who is representing a number of organizations in America who are causing political action or taking political action specifically against Ramaphosa, saying that he was involved and there was knowledge of what was going on with October the 7th. There was Iranian money. And I wrote an article where I referenced him. And DIRCO, as you mentioned, the spokesperson, took particular issue with that. I never said in the article that I can conclusively prove it. I said that this is the source and the implications of it are huge. If I remember correctly, South Africa, if found guilty, was going to be fined something like $400 million. I don't remember the exact figure, but that money obviously was going to come out of the taxpayer, and it was going to have implications for us as ordinary South African taxpayers. So DIRCO took me to task, saying that it was irresponsible journalism. And, you know, I really do try and be fair and accurate and see both sides of the story. My first concern around the DIRCO was that it was a hugely personal affront on me. When he wrote that initial response to the Mail and Guardian, he didn't actually set out why my source was wrong or what were the holes in my reporting. He rather made it a very personal attack. And sometimes when people attack the messenger to the extent that he did, it almost suggests that there's something behind the scenes, or that the person has stumbled upon something that's accurate. I do understand, I'll be honest with you, Matthew, I do understand his point about responsible reporting, of course, you know. So you can't report rumors, because even if you feel like a rumor has truth, sometimes just by reporting a rumor, it can have damage. Now, this was not a rumor. This was a lawyer who is advising companies that are taking Ramaphosa to court, and hence it's based in fact. Perhaps he had a point that I felt I mentioned it. I was quite clear that none of this was established fact, that this is the argument that they're going to be put forward. This is going to be the repercussions and the consequences if it happens. And I did feel that it was a story important enough for South Africans to be aware of. I would have liked to have had an engagement with him. After he published that article, I asked the Mail and Guardian for a right of response, and you saw that article, but it came from me. I was asking for a right of response, and I don't know if they put it further down or if the story had blown over, but there was very little feedback on my right of response. And the story shows up online as if everything he said was accurate and that I had done irresponsible reporting. And I don't think I have. I mean, it's still a story that I'm following on. I just need the court case in America to gain ground and to gain traction and for something to develop. And then I have every intention of revisiting the story with the information that has developed. I just felt that because the spokesperson was so angry And he made it such a personal condemnation of me that it almost left me with a feeling that I have stumbled onto something that's actually got a lot of more meat to it than DIRCO would like to admit.
Right. It is quite unbelievable to hear a story like that where somebody who is in this sort of high up government position decides to out one specific journalist in particular. And it just blows my mind. Perhaps it shouldn't anymore because I feel like this is normal in South Africa, but it just blows my mind to see this sort of attack, not on you specifically making an accusation that he thinks is false, but basically saying, don't you dare investigate further. Don't you do your job. So it really just baffles my mind. But I'd like to just take one last moment, one last segment in this interview to really pick your brain about some analysis that you've done, specifically with regards to some recent Middle East news. And you wrote a very interesting piece in the Times of Israel, I saw, titled How Iran Wins by Saying Nothing. And you spoke about how there's been this internet blackout in Iran and how, yes, the government instituted the blackout and cracked down on protests, but more importantly, or not more importantly, I'll say rather equally importantly, is the fact that there is the side whereby you have misinformation, disinformation, but then there's also the omission of information. And so I'd really like to give you a chance to explain why this aspect is so important, because I just feel like people don't address it enough.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because this is actually where I find my career is pivoting towards. I haven't, in the last 2 years, been going to physical war zones as much as I used to, and I've been focused much more on what I believe is equally damaging, if not more, and that is the idea that we have an information war zone out there, and that each and every one of us is involved in it. Each time you pick up your phone, I'm sure you feel it, Matthew. I talk to audiences and they feel it, where people say to me, there's so much information, I don't know what to believe. And,
Right.
particularly now with the advances in AI, I was reading the other day, I need to get my head around this. The idea is that we're going to reach a time where we're not going to be asking what's fake. We're actually going to be asking what's true, that everything is going to be potentially created by AI, where or everything is going to be potentially information that's fake, that we're actually going to have to start looking at truth being something that's more unusual. I grew up and I worked in an era when seeing was believing. I don't think seeing is believing anymore. I think verifying is believing. And so connected to your question is the idea that I feel very honored and blessed to have had the career I had, because I was a journalist in the field. I could actually go out and see things and confirm things and interview people on the ground. I think with journalism, we're going to move more in the direction that journalists might be sitting in an office and not going to the ground anymore, because you don't need to go to the ground. If something happens in Syria, by the time I get there, people have been on the ground. They've been taking photos, video with their phones, uploading it. What do you need a journalist coming in to do it, especially a journalist who needs to fly in? And the question for journalists is going to be, well, how do I know? I don't need to go and get the material, but I'm receiving all this material. How do I know what's accurate? And so I think a lot of journalism is going to be sitting in a newsroom or in an office and verifying facts, confirming, is this information accurate or not accurate? Now, you talk about leaving out context. You get two kinds of information, and I know people know the terms. You get misinformation and disinformation. And just in case somebody is not 100% familiar on what is the difference, I always remember the M from misinformation and the M from the word mistake. So misinformation is when you receive information and you share it, but you don't share it because you know it's fake. You actually do trust it, and you share it almost as a mistake, thinking that it's accurate. Disinformation is when you have information that is purposefully fake. You know it's fake and you choose to share it. And I think a lot of people are not in the disinformation sphere. I don't think people deliberately want to share information that's false. But I think, unfortunately, what happens is a lot of us are sharing information that is misinformation. We don't know it's false, and we're still sharing it. And the important point is that the consequences are the same. It doesn't matter if it's misinformation or disinformation. What matters is the fact that information that is inaccurate is being shared. And I think a lot of work needs to be done in terms of, and maybe this is, well, maybe this is the question as well, is I was going to say a lot of work needs to be done in terms of how we, as the consumers of media, become media literate. So we know what's fake and not fake and what to share and not to share. But maybe it's also the responsibility of the tech platforms. It's actually responsibility of everybody. But the problem is that governments take advantage of this whole information warfare sphere. The politicians take advantage. Scams, I was reading the other day that economic scams are the future. I mean, people who want to be scamming people online, your investment is very low. You just need a laptop and time, really. And you can make millions, if not billions from it. I myself was caught up in a romance scam, and they say romance scams are the fastest growing form of scams. So to your question, where there are gaps and there's omission in information, if I just put aside who's responsible to teach us and warn us about it, perhaps I can just share, if this is, interesting for people listening, with all the work I'm doing around this. I do believe that some of the responsibility rests with us, and some of the strongest points I can give is, number one, all of us, when we get information, just stop for a moment and pause. Ideas like, if it's too good to be true, it's not going to be true or accurate. What happens in social media, particularly where a lot of us are getting our information, is we are operating from the parts of our brain that are emotionally driven, that are not rational. And as soon as you see something that makes you angry or makes you feel a strong emotion, that part of your brain overrides the rational part, and you're sharing and you're reacting before you've actually even thought, could this be accurate? And just something as simple as pausing when you look at some information will help potentially your emotions to calm down a bit, and for the rational part of your brain to come in, and for you to actually stop for a moment and think. And then the second part is to check the sources. And a lot of work has been done in this respect. I mean, it's interesting. AI was about creating human-like video and photos. And now you have AI companies that are trying to look at ways of putting a digital signature on an AI photo or an AI video to warn people that even though it's so human-like, it's actually AI made. I mean, it's crazy. But, they talk about like the phones in the cameras in our cell phones making a digital signature as well, or ways that we can verify if information if the chain of information has been interrupted and in any way kind of manipulated along the way. So there are advances in that, but and there are responsibilities for us as people. Let's stop, let's check the sources. A very good question to ask about a source is, who wants me to believe this and why? And then that, in a way, will bring back a bit of common sense and bring back our human agency, because unfortunately, I think we're losing that. The number one commodity today in the world is attention. If you look at something like Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, is a company worth more than $1 trillion. And we are all on it every single day, whether it's WhatsApp or whatever. And they reckon South Africans, we're spending more than 9 hours a day online. So we need to be very conscious of where our attention is going, because where attention goes, money goes. We don't pay Facebook. But Facebook, as business's model, as you know, is made up of them having access to more than half the world's information and attention, or attention specifically, and allowing advertisers to have access to that attention. So it's about, that's the future for media. And we've been talking about the physical war zones I've been in. People don't need to go to a physical war zone. I don't know if you have been, Matthew, but you don't need to go. You just need to switch on your phone and you are in a war zone. And that war zone is trying to grab your attention. It is trying to manipulate you with the algorithms that take 0.03 seconds to determine. And it's not even what you're interested in. It's just where you had perhaps a pause. That algorithm sends you more and more of the same information. We are becoming a society, and this is a global population where we mentioned the word earlier, we are living in our different echo chambers of information. You and I could be looking at the same physical wall, but online, the information we receive, you would think we were in two completely different wars, and we're not communicating anymore. We are becoming products of what the algorithms, the platforms, the politicians want us to believe. So it's all about getting our own agency back and being much more discerning to where we apply our attention and the information that we choose to watch, listen to, and ultimately believe.
Right, and that is just such an incredibly important point that I think actually ties into the rest of the conversation, right? Because of course, you've been on the forefront of information gathering and filming, and I think it's just quite sad to see how some people will take a lot of the good work that you've done and other reporters around the world have done and almost cast it aside to an extent because they'll get another report online, which may not be a legitimate report. It could be misinformation or disinformation, as you've explained. And it almost sort of overtakes the genuine hard work of those people on the ground. So, yes, I think these are well. Firstly, it's a very important lesson to keep in mind that you mentioned. So, thank you for that. And secondly, I hope that people do just keep that in mind as they continue gathering information on a daily basis. But I'd love to end off, Paula, by asking you. I mean, you've done so much throughout your career, but for people who have enjoyed what you have to say and perhaps want to hear more from you, what are you up to at the moment? Where can people find you?
So I'm doing a lot of work around the whole information war zone and lecturing at Boston Media School. I am giving a lot of talks and seminars at different business institutes. Also at another, well, I'm 53, so it's not exactly a zero, but remember I explained the 30, so 50 is worse.
Yes.
I wish I could be back in my 30s now, but what do they say? They say 50 is the new 40, so I mustn't complain. And I find with a lot of my friends, I was told it's not I was told the right term to use is a midlife reset. So I'm going through a midlife reset, where I lived in Israel for 18 years, and I'm toying with the idea I still have everything in Israel, whether I want to go back there, or whether I want to move and live somewhere else. I'm presently in South Africa. Thank you for mentioning some of the publications I write for, like Forbes Africa and the Times of Israel, and I try to keep my website and some of my social media platforms active with my writing and where I'm going. And I appreciate you mentioning that. Thank you. I think I haven't quite found my path for the next part of my life. I feel like, as much as I feel honored and privileged to have been able to go to physical war zones, there's a part of me that wants to go back, but in a different capacity. I don't think I want to go back and do breaking news anymore. And actually, just following on from what we were saying, I mean, what is breaking news? Today, it's social media. You don't need a news channel. And also following on from what you're saying, the research shows that because people don't know who to trust, there's a return. I don't know if it's a return as much as there's a movement towards personality driven journalism. So people very often find a journalist that they trust and they follow the information that that journalist gives. So I would still like to be somebody that people do trust, and I would like to do important journalism. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to go. I probably will go more in the area of academia. I find that very, very interesting. I've done it the wrong way around. Instead of studying journalism and then becoming a journalist, I did journalism for 30 years, and now I'm finding it interesting to go and study because
Right.
I think we don't even know what journalism is anymore. I mean, you alluded at that as well. Like if anybody who picks up a phone can call themselves a journalist. And when I started in this profession, I had these wonderful ideas of changing the world and showing both sides of the story. And I know that my editors at the time said to me, you'll become cynical. You'll become jaded. So maybe I just became another journalist who became cynical and jaded. And we live in a time that information is being so badly abused, and information is so powerful that if I could find a way of making a contribution in whatever journalism means going forward, and I'm still trying to figure out that, then that's where I'd like to be.
Right, right. Apologies for my delay in response there. I'm still gobsmacked from you saying that you're 53. I had you at least a decade younger. So you're definitely
Oh,
going to have to share you're going to have to share your skincare routine off the record after we wrap up.
we should have had the last question at the beginning, and I would have just sat smiling at you the whole interview.
Oh, I'll remember for next time.
Oh, okay.
Of course, of course. But Paula, thank you so much for your time. I certainly found that very enlightening, and I hope that the viewers at home did as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
And Matthew, just from my side, you asked me questions that I haven't been asked in a long time. You made me think. And thank you for taking the time to read some of my articles, look up about who I am, and ask me challenging questions. It's a pleasure for me. You've made me think. So thank you for your time, and I hope people have found this interesting.
Oh, well, it's only my pleasure. And so, yes, thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch. I really do hope that you found it as insightful as I did. So, yes, it will be definitely very interesting to see where life goes for you from here on out, Paula. And of course, for those of you who did enjoy this chat and would like more content like this, please remember to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.